Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to another Recent Reads on Sunday. The second Recent Reads on Sunday in a row. I'm absolutely impressed with myself. But public service announcement: there will be no video on Wednesday because I'm with my mother next week. I'm visiting my mother to take care of her for a little bit for a week, and so there will be no video on Wednesday. So there you go. Nothing really changed. But let's talk about the books, or some of the books that I finished recently. And the first one was not that much of a success, and that was a debut novel, The Optimistic Decade. Yeah. The Optimistic Decade by Heather Abel, published in 2018. And this was sort of a leftover from last year. You might remember vaguely that I had this idea of reading the decade, so reading one fiction and one nonfiction book for each year between 2010 and 2019. Yes, Brian, that's not a decade. I know that. But anyway, I never finished that project, but there were a couple of books that I already bought. So they carried over my TBR to 2021. And one of them was this one. Yeah, okay. So let me first tell you what the book is about. That might be helpful. So the book is set in two timelines, the Reagan years, the 1980s, and then the beginning of the 1990s, mid-1990s. And we follow a young college student, young woman in her late teens, Rebecca, and her father. He runs together with his wife a left-wing magazine. And then you have Caleb, that's the uncle, Rebecca's uncle, and he started in the 80s. He started this sort of live differently, back to nature kind of camp. And those are the main characters. And then Rebecca goes during this summer in the 1990s. She goes to the camp to be a counselor. It's a youth camp, so children come there for vacation. Her father has trouble with his newspaper, and then there is David, another teenage boy in the camp. And the writing was good. There's a story there about the camp and how it came to be, and the former owners, but also, Rebecca and David as two young people just at the end of their teenage years and coming of age story. What do they want to do with their life? Rebecca wants to sort of, get into the footsteps of her father's and mother's activist life. David isn't sure, and there might be also a little bit of a romance. That all sounds not bad, but again, the writing was good, and Heather Abel can write a scene. She can write good dialogue. My issue with the book was twofold. I thought it was quite boring at times. The scenes as such were not badly done, but it was like, okay, is this going anywhere anytime soon? And the other thing that really bothered me is that it was so obviously political. I felt I'm getting hit over the head with the political message. And I never liked that. I mean, if you want to write that kind of book, write a nonfiction book. But if you want to incorporate politics into your fiction, that's fine. But incorporate it into the story, into the characters, and don't make the characters just mouthpieces for certain political ideas. So, yeah, unfortunately, this wasn't a success, but I think, still think, because it's a debut, that Heather Abel might be an author to watch because she can write really well. So, there you go. That was the first one of my leftover TBR books 2020 that I read this year. I had better luck with my nonfiction, which is kind of a theme that started last year, that my nonfiction is really good and the fiction is not always I mean, I had some really great fiction reads, don't get me wrong, but somehow I think it's also because I'm more into nonfiction at the moment. I have these phases where I read almost exclusively fiction, and then I have the opposite phase where I read 80% nonfiction, and I think I'm in one of those now, and then it's easier for me, to pick a good nonfiction book. But anyway, the one I read together with Heidi from my reading life as a buddy read in January was A Lab of One's Own by Rita Colwell, published last year. Rita Colwell is a scientist, a microbiologist. She was born in the 1930s, and she was also head of the National Science Foundation in the late 1990s. And this is Heidi said to me when we talked about the book, it's not really a memoir. It's more an essay about, how science treats women. And yeah, Heidi is right, as always, to an extent, but it does chronicle Rita Colwell's life from the beginning when she started in college and university, her PhD days, and how incredibly difficult it was for a female PhD student to get a supervisor who would be willing to supervise a woman with a PhD, how difficult it was to get into science at all as a woman at that time. And she also gives us very short interludes, or she not interludes, she weaves that in her own story about other women in science in the past. And she ends the book in the present and with a sort of how-to chapter for young female scientists, how to navigate the still very male-dominant sciences and the sexism you might encounter. And I thought it was really interesting. It was quite matter-of-factly from, if you look at the writing. If you have read Lab Girl, for instance, by Hope Jahren, this is not written in the same style. This is quite, I don't want to say cool because that sounds negative, but it's very matter-of-factly. But if you are interested in women in science and how difficult it is for women in science still in the 21st century to get anywhere, then I can certainly recommend this book. Another nonfiction book that I finished, another buddy read, this time with Kathleen from Kathleen Ann, who used to make videos, and I'm pushing her to come back in 2021, but so far she hasn't made a video in a couple of months. But anyway, she still does buddy reads, thank God. And we read The Gendered Brain by Gina Rippon. Gina Rippon is a neuroscientist, and in this book, which is quite a chunker, she talks about neuroscience, but from a specific vantage point, and that is neuroscience and the search for the female versus male brain, and how non-objective this search is, and how much this approach sort of skews the idea of the general public, like you and me, about that there is something like a female and a male brain, and that females might not be as good in mathematics or science. See the book that I just talked to you about, because they just don't have the brain for it. And she takes those myths and discards them. And it's an interesting read if you are, into neuroscience and this angle of feminism and the difficulty for women also to combat these kind of myths. Kathleen Ann and we read a quite similar book by Cordelia Fine before that. And so it was a bit repetitive, this one, because we had read about the same subject written by a different author just before this one, but that's obviously not the fault of this book, it's quite recent, by the way. I don't think I said this, published 2019, and it's written in a language. I'm not a scientist. I mean, I'm interested in neuroscience. I'm always interested in all matters of the brain, gray and otherwise. Oh, I did a pun. Anyway, it's Sunday. But it's really engagingly written, and it explains it in a way that you can understand it without feeling stupid. And I thought it was really interesting, this history of, the gendered brain and how we approach the brain research. So if you are into those subjects, I can certainly recommend it. Oh, and I don't think I gave you the title of the Cordelia Fine book. No, I didn't. So it's Delusions of Gender by Cordelia Fine. I will leave a picture of the cover here, published in 2011. And I also think that was one of the reasons that Kathleen and I decided to read The Gendered Brain, because it was 2019, so more recent. But I don't think it makes sense really to read both books, so you can choose either one of them if you're interested in the topic, as I said. And I also finished my first 3 books in the, this genre spotlight thing that I have going on in 2021, science fiction. I told you last time, I think, that I read also Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea, the first Wizard of Earthsea, her fantasy series, and that I'm not going to continue, but I will I will focus on her sci-fi. So I will read and / reread the Hainish cycle. And I started that with this one, Worlds of Exile and Illusion. This is the first 3 books in one. So Rocannon's World, Planet of Exile, and City of Illusions, the first 3. And as you can see, this looks like, a medium-sized book. So the 3 first stories are rather novellas than novels. They were published, the Rocannon's World was Ursula Le Guin's debut novel in 1966, and the other 2 were published 1966 and 67, in which she establishes the Hainish, the world of the Hainish, and that, extraterrestrial sci-fi world. We encounter in the first one a Rocannon, a sort of a scientist who explores other aliens, or people living on other worlds, we should say. And the second one is about 2 tribes on one planet, and then they are not bad at all. I mean, I have to remind myself, it's like, more than half a century that they were published. And what you can see, I think, is that Ursula Le Guin was building a world. So the world and how it works and the connections between various worlds, I think, was more important for her in those 3 than the actual story. The story is not, the stories in these 3 books is not that groundbreaking. One of the last one, the City of Illusions, you have this main protagonist who wakes up on a planet, has no recollection where he comes from, and then after a while goes on searching for his roots. So it's these kind of stories that are interesting to read, but are not in any way groundbreaking. But I wanted to reread the sort of the foundation of her later novels, and the next one is obviously the 4th one in the Hainish cycle is The Left Hand of Darkness, and I will be reading that in February as a buddy read with Adam, who used to be from Memento Mori but has said goodbye to BookTube, unfortunately, a long time ago. But I mean, if you're interested in Ursula Le Guin, it's not bad. It's just not, you might, if you have never read Ursula Le Guin and how famous she was and how much she meant for sci-fi, you might expect something that blows you out of the water completely. And I don't think these first 3 books in the Hainish cycle, excuse me, are books like that. But still worthwhile, and I mean, I enjoyed reading them. So these were some of. So I'm having trouble with my voice. I'm sorry, coughing at you and making strange noises. I don't know. Anyway, these were some of the books that I read recently. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I'm looking forward to your comments. What have you read recently that sort of impressed you or disappointed you? Have you read any of the books that I mentioned? And I will talk to you soon in the next one, which will not be on Wednesday, but a week from now, next Sunday.